Billy Campbell is back as Okana? Outrageous. Hello interwebs, I am here to review the latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, this time Season 1, Episode 14. Why do I never remember the title of the episode before I start the recording? Every time I do this. Crossroads. Crossroads is the name of the episode. Anyways, I'm here to review this one. Staying spoiler free, I will say, first and foremost, there was a lot that I liked about this episode, not the least of which is the return of Billy Campbell as the outrageous Okana from the episode The Outrageous Okana from Star Trek The Next Generation. Great to see him. Technically not the character's first return to modern Star Trek, as he did appear briefly in Season 2 of Star Trek Lower Decks, but this is the first time the actor has been back in the role and actually has a featured part in the story. So that was great. There are other elements of this episode that I really loved. That being said, I think I found this episode to probably be one of the most frustrating episodes of Star Trek Prodigy to date, because it relies heavily on a storytelling trope that every time it appears, it really frustrates me. And I've said this across numerous different shows and numerous different reviews that I've done on this channel. I really dislike the miscommunication trope in any type of story, where it's just characters just slightly misinterpreting each other, not actually understanding what they're trying to say, or just telling each other crucial pieces of information that causes them to be at odds with each other. If they would just sit down and talk for like 5 more seconds, everything would be fine, but because of just the exact circumstances of where we're under, they actually don't talk. And that is the thing that frustrates me, but what frustrates me even more is that in this episode, there are several times where our characters have chances to get across crucial misinformation, and they do not, for various reasons, of varying different frustration levels. But the fact that the episode literally had 3 scenes in a row where they had this happen, where characters just miss talking to each other and just miss telling the right information to the right people at the right time, it leads to the big conflict that we have going forward. And it really frustrated me. And for that, I have to say, I ultimately did not love this episode overall. That being said, I do think that there are some good things in here. So I don't want to say oh, this was trash or anything like that. Please don't say that that's what I'm saying. It is just, this episode relies very heavily on a particular storytelling trope that always bugs me when it shows up, and this did it to the extreme. So if it's this type of storytelling trope is not something that bothers you as much, I could see you really liking this episode a lot more than me. For me, it really just frustrated me a lot watching it. I feel bad saying that, but I gotta be honest with my feelings watching the episode. That being said, like I said, there are other good things in here. There are some great references to different bits of Star Trek lore that I loved to see here. We also got a couple cool things on the Murph front, which made me very happy, and there were some great emotional scenes between our characters, specifically for Admiral Janeway, that I really loved. So this is like a very up and down episode for me, but I think I am going to have to put it in the more frustrating camp than in the more positive camp, unfortunately. But mileage may vary. But to talk about that more specifically, I'm going to have to dive into spoilers. So if you have not seen the episode yet, you can jump off here. Alright, we start off the episode again with the Diviner, who is starting to get his memory back, but it's still not fully there. He still seems like he might be at least capable of being on the good guy team here, and he is making this Trill officer that is helping him aware that he has a daughter named Gwen, which will come up later on in the episode. Also, hearing all this does make me wonder if the fact that he is encountering Starfleet now will ultimately be what leads to his species encountering the Federation in the future, as we know, because of the time travel shenanigans. So I'm ultimately curious if it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy that is going to happen here. So I'll be curious about that. Moving forward, we do get the crew is now on this ice planet because their plan is to, because they can't use the Protostar to contact Starfleet because it would endanger Starfleet, they're going to stash the ship and then try and find a shuttle pod or some way to get to Starfleet to warn them that way. Very smart plan. I actually really liked this, and the emotional goodbye that Holo Janeway has with the crew was, it felt very earned. She's like, look, I'm proud of you. You're going to be able to do this. It won't seem like a long time for me, whether I see you in 3 days or 3 years. I just want to know that you are all going to be safe, and tell Murph that I'm excited to see him hatch. I thought all of that was adorable. I loved that scene. Probably one of my favorite scenes of the episode. Then we have our crew walking towards this basically we learned a depot that they can get transport off of, and the way it's described, it sounds very Mos Eisley-esque, in like it's a scum and villainy sort of place. So it just sounded like this was the ice planet version of Mos Eisley from Star Wars. So that was a fun little reference there, and it gets even more explicit in terms of this reference when they do run into, as I said before, Billy Campbell playing once again Outrageous Okana. Great to see him. He has an eye patch now, but he's still just as sexy as he was in The Next Generation. And I love that he's very Han Solo-y. Like, he literally is just like, look, my ship can take you wherever you need to go. It's really fast. He's smuggling stuff, so these the security officers come after him. It was very Han Solo type introduction to him. Loved that. So he's here for that. I also should point out the security officers, maybe I'm reading them wrong, but I think they are Xindi reptilians, which my Star Trek Enterprise love and heart adored. Always glad to see the Xindi reference somewhere, so nice for them to show up here as the security officers. But then we jump over to the depot as our crew tries to find transport, and we see also that our Denobulan friend from the mid-season premiere in the space station that got destroyed is also here and spreading rumors about them and misinformation about them because of his misunderstanding of them, even speaking to a Kazon, which was also kind of cool. However, this then leads to the scenes that I was talking about earlier, which are the just scene after scene of characters miscommunicating with each other, and lowering in frustration for me with each one, but still frustrating me. We start off this sequence of events with Admiral Janeway's crew landing in the same depot. So I'm like, okay, so now we're going to have our characters encounter each other. And we start off with our first one, which was the most frustrating for me. Maybe second most, but close to the top, where Rok-Tahk just misses seeing Admiral Janeway. And I'm like, are they all just gonna miss them? Literally just misses them. Then we get a scene where Hogg running into the Tellarite doctor, and because they are both Tellarites, and our Dr. Tellarite's a little bit of a racist, or at least a heightist in his species, against Pog, and because they're both Tellarites, they yell at each other and they don't actually communicate. On the one hand, I understand that this comes out of Tellarite's personality. It comes out of the personality of both of these characters that we have seen before. That Tellarites are very argumentative as part of their species, this established lore, so of course they are going to be argumentative with each other. I really feel like the Doctor, as part of Starfleet, would be better than that. We've seen nicer Tellarites in Starfleet. It felt very forced to me to get to the point where they wouldn't communicate with each other, especially because Pog knows the stakes here. Like, Pog, I understand he's a hot-headed character, but he knows the stakes. And it frustrated me to just see him not communicate. It's like, get hot-headed, but then chase after him and talk to him and say something like, look, I got information. Like, it just, that was the one that I think this one probably frustrates me more than the Rok-Tahk one, but it's just like, So I was frustrated with that bit. Then we go to a scene that was slightly better for me. Still frustrating, but slightly more understandable, where Gwen runs into the Trill ensign, who has been helping the Diviner. She recognizes her as Gwen, and so says, okay, you need to get to your ship, but Gwen is sort of scared because she realizes her father's on the ship, and so she runs away. This is still frustrating to me, because it's like, if characters just spoke to each other and had more information, it would fix the problem. But at least comes out of an understandable trauma that Gwen is dealing with. She has a deep fear of her father for his manipulation and abuse of her. So her fleeing that situation read much more understandable to me. So that one I was probably the most forgiving of. Still frustrating, but more understandable. This then leads us to the Doll one, where Doll runs into Admiral Janeway. I loved the first interaction. This was great. He sort of inspires her. Again, kind of with the Star Wars reference here, which he says, like, where Doll's like, I want to join Starfleet, and she says, well, in Starfleet, it's either make it so or you don't. And so it's like kind of reminded me of Yoda saying, do or do not, there is no try. So someone was very much channeling the Star Wars energy in this episode, so I was very here for that. But then we have our Denobulan friend running up to Janeway to tell them what was going on, and this leads Doll to have to slink back. Again, this one I found more frustrating than the Gwen one, because it's like, I understand, but not as bad as Rock Talk, because it's like, I understand Doll being afraid and being like, look, the Denobian guy's gonna tell her all this wrong information because he's sort of got a skewed version of us. But I also am like, well, if Doll had stayed there, like, imagine what happened if Doll had stayed there. The Denobian would have come up and said, that's the guy who blew up my station. Jane would have been like, all right, arrest him. Doll would have been arrested. And then he could have spoken to Janeway in the brig and explained everything to her, and then they could have taken her to the Protostar and figured it out. Now, I get that would stop the plot cold, and I understand you need a couple of contrivances to make certain plot beats happen. It happens in stories. Sometimes you gotta do that. It's just part of writing. But the fact that they showed me 3 successive sequences before this, where you have missed opportunities, and it just kept frustrating me, that this one, while would have been somewhat understandable in the moment, was the one that most frustrated me, because it's like, if you had just stuck around, it would have been fine. And so just to build all these frustrations atop each other, I don't know if it was the right choice. I can buy 1. I can maybe buy 2. 4? It just stretches my belief and really just frustrates me the most. Like, I understand a bit part. I don't want to nail on this too much. I'll just make this last point because I don't want to seem overly negative, but I really have to be clear about it. I feel like it is understandable if you want your audience to feel frustrated at certain points. But there is a line where I think you over-frustrate your audience. And I feel like this episode, for me, hit it. Where it just... You're still, when you're intentionally frustrating your audience, you're still frustrating them, which is not a necessarily good emotion to feel about a story you're telling. But it can work in little bits and like pieces. But here, I just think they did it too much, stretched my believability too much with it, and it left me feeling very, very frustrated. I will leave it there because I don't want to. I know I'm harping on it a bit too much here. But that is ultimately my big criticism of this episode, that I left these sequence of events here in the middle most frustrated than I've felt, which I don't think was the intention as much, or at least not as much as I felt. Moving on, though, accepting that happened. Let's get into the rest of the episode, because the rest of it I did like, bar for one more thing. So the rest of this was great. I love the chase sequence where they're trying to escape. Murph is hatching at that exact moment, so just complicating factors on complicating factors. Okana's on the ship there too, so he's with them. It's a fun little piece of that. And he gives them essentially some nitrous to get away from the Xindi Reptilian security ship. And I'm like, they're fast and furiousing it. I'm here for it. Like, hit the NOS. So that was great. Then they get to the Protostar, go underneath, and Admiral Janeway sees the Protostar go up and wants to chase after them. I love when the crew gets on the Protostar. They're like, Hollow Janeway is just like, well, what? How long have you been? How long has it been? You've been missing? I want to hear everything. He's like, yeah, it's been like 5 minutes. We already screwed up already. That was fun. They start running away from the Protostar. I love them getting into warp, and Okana's like, this is warp 4? And Pog is like, this is warp 9.97, my friend. Hold on to your butt. Loved that. But then it leads to them sort of saying, like, look, we can't handle a Janeway. We have to, like, look hostile because it's protecting her. And I thought that was great. That actually works really, really well for me. Like, I am totally here for them. Like, they are forced to look hostile because they cannot communicate because it would cause danger to Janeway. I was great with that. That's all you needed. But then they decide to force it a little bit more. And I really dislike this because Murph hatches, and new Murph looks adorable, by the way. I'm going to buy all the regular Murph action figures. Now I'm going to buy all the new Murph action figures. New Murph looks adorable. But then new Murph sits on the console shooting a missile at the Dauntless Janeway ship. And that just felt like, again, them trying to force the Protostar crew to look hostile. And I'm like, you didn't need that. You really didn't. Like, they already looked hostile enough by running away and not communicating, which I understood because that's the situation that they're in. By having this, like, really unnecessary, like, shooting of the missile caused by Murph, it's just causing more contention than it, I think, is warranted or needed, and just feels like you're escalating for no reason. Again, it was just a moment that I really did not like, because I thought, especially in this case, because I thought it was unnecessary. So, there's that. However, moving on though, I do like the resolution of the episode because we have the crew realizing they can go into the neutral zone between Romulan and Federation border in order to escape Janeway's crew. And this also fixes the problem that I had last episode where it was like, I don't really know where they are in Federation space in relation to it. Now I kind of do know because we're on the edge of Romulan space. Liked that. Made sense to me that they would want to get close to Federation space in order to try to transport there and warn them at the beginning of the episode. So it makes sense that they would be this close to Federation space here. So they get away, and Admiral Janeway orders them to go in because she is so dead set on trying to figure out what happened to Chakotay. Love this. It's giving a good, flawed motivation for Janeway. Like that. She's overrun by emotion a little bit, which is why she might be a little bit hot-headed in this sequence and be a bit antagonistic towards our crew. That also works for me really well. Love that characterization. We have our captain, or Janeway's number one on the Dauntless, saying, like, look, I can't follow this order. You're being a bit too emotional here. And then the Romulans showing up and say, hey, if you enter our neutral zone, you'll start a war. And that's frustrating Admiral Janeway. So all of that worked really, really well for me. So to wrap out my thoughts on this episode, without over-harping on what I've over-harped on, I will say I found some of the scenes leading to the misinformation and the crew not getting to communicate with Starfleet to be very frustrating, made that point known. I did dislike the needless escalating of the stakes with Murph shooting the missile. Thought that was unnecessary, especially given that the stakes were already high enough. But that being said, to focus on the positives, I loved the Star Wars vibe that this episode was giving. Was totally here for that. I loved some of the emotional moments, specifically between Holo Janeway and the entire crew, as well as Dahl and Admiral Janeway. I thought that was great. The characterization of Admiral Janeway in her dead set pursuit and trying to figure out what happened to Chakotay, leading to her being kind of overly invested in getting the Protostar. I thought that was really, really good. And I also just liked Murph. New Murph was adorable. So yeah. Very mixed episode for me. Lot to love, lot to dislike. But that's my thoughts on this episode of Star Trek Prodigy. What did you think of this episode? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.